Okay, guys, I wanted to just give you two models of presentations that students have done in the past. The first one for Scooby-Doo 2 applies the feminist lens, and the second one that I'm going to show you for Courage the Cowardly Dog applies more the masculinity lens. This first one I thought was quite good, and I want to point out just to begin with that aesthetically it's pleasing. It's not just a lot of dead space. There is a lot of interesting background to it. There's also a picture of the cast of Scooby-Doo 2 so that the group could introduce the two characters that they're going to talk about the most, Daphne and Velma. And they make sure to apply the Bechdel-Wallace test and the Smurfette principle and to explain why it does pass the Bechdel-Wallace test and why it doesn't follow the Smurfette principle. They just have bullet points here. You have to understand you don't put everything you're going to say on a Google slide. You're making a presentation, so you want to put just some bullet points to remind yourself of what you want to talk about. But the group did go into much more detail with what they were talking about on each of these slides. And then in the next slide, they embedded a video clip. I'm not going to show you the video clip. I will upload this to the modules page on Canvas, so you can take a look at both of the presentations if you want to in your leisure time. But this clip is basically Daphne, this character, freaking out because she sees a guy who she likes and she doesn't know what to say, and so she runs away and Daphne tries to help her. And one of the things Daphne helps her with is to tell her that everyone has flaws and insecurities, and that the best way to go about catching a guy is to hide them. And the group, you can see, puts comforting words in quotation marks because they're not comforting. They are very unhealthy messages to give to girls. So they talked about how unhealthy that was for young girls to be watching, and that that wasn't a great message that Daphne was portraying. And then there was another part of the clip that they put here. And they scatter clips throughout, and after they have the clip in it, they talk about it. The clip that just happened was Daphne giving Velma a makeover, which totally transforms Velma into something that isn't her, that's completely awkward, and makes her into more Daphne like figure. And she can't do any of the things that she normally does, and she looks ridiculous. And so it's again part of that unhealthy idea that girls always get that it's all have to be about clothing and makeup, and you shouldn't be smart. Guys don't like smart girls, that kind of thing, which Velma comes to understand isn't true, but still, that's the message portrayed. And then they have a clip about Daphne, and about Daphne seems to only care about fashion and beauty. So she's very traditionally stereotyped as a girly kind of female, even though she's quite capable of doing other things. So there are clips embedded throughout, um, and a lot about the differences between Daphne and Velma and uh, what they represent. And then there's also something that I thought was quite interesting that the group put in there about how these two characters, Daphne and Heather, they fight, but when they fight, one, they're not just talking about men, so it passes the Bechdel-Wallace test, but also that it's an example of women tearing down other women, which is one of the things that is traditionally that feminists point out this traditional thing that women do, that women go after women. It's not just men that make women seem inferior, but women do it to each other. And then this was the final slide. You don't really need a slide like that, but they have it. But you'll notice this is the 13th slide. You have a minimum of 6 slides, but all of their slides had something really valuable to contribute. Now, this one will take you to the beginning of it. For Courage the Cowardly Dog. You'll notice right away there's not a lot of visual aesthetic stuff to look at. It's just blank. So it's not really visually appealing. So you want to keep that in mind. And now there's nothing wrong with introducing your characters because not everybody may know who they are. But this is one of their 6 slides, and they don't. This doesn't contribute anything to their discussion of masculinity. So that's not a positive. What is more positive is they do talk about the characters separately. So they introduce this character, Eustace, and they talk about how Eustace is an example of toxic masculinity, and they give examples of that, again in bullet points, because the group presented their information in much more detail. Um, it also shows how these are negatives and how this is not a positive role model for boys or for any audience member, really. And then they did give clips. Because it's a TV show, they had to go to Dailymotion. And Google Slides only lets you embed from certain sites. And I don't think Dailymotion is one of them. I could be wrong. Always, if you can, embed the slide. And if you don't know how to do that, I can go through and show you how to do that. But it's pretty easy. It's just insert video and you put the clip in. But I know that YouTube will let you do it, but not all of the video sites will. So, that's understandable. If you can't embed it, then you put the link in. And they showed these clips to show how Eustace, to give examples of how Eustace was toxic masculinity, and they explained it as they were showing the clips. And then they get to Courage, who they called a sensitive masculinity example, and they talked about how, but they also talked about how that was positive, and therefore not an example of hypomasculinity, because hypomasculinity is negative. It's a negative response to messages boys get. Courage is not a wimp. Courage is, although he seems very frightened a lot of the times, he actually is quite courageous, and he does do things that others won't do, and he saves his owner, Muriel, Eustace's wife, all the time, and often Eustace as well. So they do talk about it, and they do use the terminology, which is positive. And then they show clips of that. And then they do give a bit of a background of subliminal messages, which is very good. So these are the things that you would show that this is negative, because Eustace only gets into trouble. It's really a bad thing to say that it's okay to boss your wife around. There are also messages that Eustace is always saved somehow in the end, so being angry and yelling don't have any consequences, and so on. So messages from Eustace are really quite negative messages for boys, even though they might not appear to be. Messages from Courage are more positive messages, although sometimes Courage does come off as kind of wimpy, and that could be something negative. And then they say thanks for watching, and that's their 6th slide. So they really only have like 5 slides, maybe 4.5 slides that actually get into the topics at hand. And so these guys didn't get an A. They had some really good points in here, but they could have done a lot more to make this a more engaging presentation. Okay, so I am going to upload this video to the Canvas modules page. And I'm also going to upload these 2 presentations so that you can view them if you want to. Obviously, do not use them for your own presentations. Use them as models if you wish to. Okay, and certainly remember that this one is not an A model, whereas the other one for Scooby-Doo is, and it has nothing to do with the gender. It has more to do with the depth and the visual appeal and the effort that went into the first presentation as opposed